All right, diving into another one of these deep dives where we break down some pretty complex stuff. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a way better grip on what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Cut through the noise and get to like the need to know stuff.
Need to know stuff. So today we're heading way up north to the Arctic.
Oh, yeah.
Which for a lot of us who are, maybe focused on what's going on right here at home.
Right.
It can seem really, really far away.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more and more globally important, and especially for those of you listening who are, working hard getting ready for those UPSC exams.
Right.
India's Arctic strategy. It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that touches on pretty much everything. You've got the economic side of things, strategic, how we position ourselves, and then, of course, can't forget about the environment.
Right. It's all tied together up there.
Big time.
So we've been doing our homework, going through a bunch of recent reports and analyses. The Hindu had some good stuff, ORF, Observer Research Foundation. They always have really good insights.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to try to piece it all together, and really try to understand what exactly is India doing, up there in this frozen north.
Yeah, totally. And it's, like you said, it's not just about like the polar bears and the ice caps, right? It's about how India fits into like this whole global puzzle that's always changing. Right?
Yeah, it's like a moving target almost.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll break it down. Why should India even care about the Arctic? What are they doing right now? Are they missing anything?
Yeah.
And then, what are the potential, I guess, wins, and also the things we need to watch out for, especially as like the whole geopolitical game is changing.
Right.
So think of this as your crash course, your cheat sheet on India and the Arctic.
Yeah, like Arctic 101, but tailored for you, so you're in the know.
Oh, exactly. All right, well, let's dive right in. So 2022, India finally, officially releases its Arctic policy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on this whole idea of a whole-of-government approach.
Yes.
What does that even mean?
So basically it means that you've got all these different parts of the Indian government, different ministries, different departments, they're all involved.
Okay.
It's not just one, like Arctic department or something.
No.
Right.
Right.
It's everyone working together, and they're focusing on three main things, the big three. Climate and the environment, of course. Economic and human development, so how do people live and work up there? And then, international cooperation, how do we all get along in the Arctic sandbox?
Okay, so pretty comprehensive.
It seems like it, yeah.
It's got it all.
Mm-hmm.
But from what we're seeing in these reports, there's this one pretty big piece that might be missing.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. The policy, it's great. It focuses on the environment. It focuses on people. But it doesn't really talk that much about all the military stuff that's going on and all the competition between, like, the big players on the world stage.
Okay, so like the actual like power struggles and who's flexing their muscles.
Exactly. Like who's got ships where and who's building bases, that kind of thing. And it's getting like more and more intense up there.
So we've got these three pillars, right? The climate, the economic and development, and the international cooperation.
Right.
What are they saying we need to add to really make this policy like future-proof, really make it strong?
Well, what they're saying is, India's got to think about its long-term strategy, right? And the
right.
Arctic, it's becoming super strategically important.
Okay.
So they're suggesting the seventh pillar, right? And this one's all about geopolitics.
Okay.
Like you said, the power struggles, the competition, all that. Because if India doesn't pay attention to this, they're going to end up reacting to what everyone else is doing.
Right.
Instead of, being proactive and shaping things.
Yeah, you don't want to be caught flat-footed.
Exactly.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the economics of the Arctic.
Okay, yeah.
We always hear about the ice melting, right?
Yeah.
And how that's opening up all these new sea routes, especially this northern sea route, the NSR.
Right.
What does that mean for India?
So, yeah, less ice means ships can, like, cut through the Arctic, right? And that makes it a shorter trip between Europe and Asia.
Okay.
But for India right now, it's not like a total game changer. There's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah.
The weather up there is crazy. 1 minute it's okay, the next minute it's a blizzard.
Right.
The route isn't always open, and there's not a lot of infrastructure like ports and stuff.
Yeah, it's not like a highway up there.
No, not yet.
Not yet. But our sources are talking about some pretty interesting possibilities with trade corridors that India is already working on. Specifically, the International North-South Transport Corridor, or INSTC, And Russia's Unified Deepwater System, the UDWS.
Right. So the INSTC, just to give everyone a quick rundown,
Yeah, I've heard
it's
it.
basically this big network of ships, trains, and roads that India's been building to make it easier to trade with Central Asia and Russia.
Yeah?
The idea is to make it cheaper and faster to move goods, instead of having to go all the way around through the Mediterranean and the Suez Canal.
Right.
So now if you connect the INSTC with Russia's water system, the UDWS, which is all these rivers and canals and stuff,
Okay.
you could really cut down on transportation costs.
Wow.
And it would open up all these areas that are kind of landlocked right now, give them better access to markets.
So it's like a double win?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a synergy. Yeah.
And then there's another corridor that India is focusing on, right?
Yeah.
Closer to home, the Cheney-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor.
Yeah, that's a big one.
How does that fit into this whole Arctic picture?
This is where it gets really interesting, especially if you're thinking long term, The idea is to eventually connect this route, which goes from India's east coast all the way to Russia's far east with the Northern Sea route.
Okay.
So imagine this. You can go from India to Europe 2 weeks fast.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
That's a lot of time.
That's huge, especially when you're talking about shipping costs and getting your products to market quickly.
Wow. Okay, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's the long game.
Now, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. Or maybe we should say the dragon on the ice.
Right.
China. We can't ignore them.
No, definitely not.
They've got a growing presence in the Arctic, especially in the Russian Arctic.
Yeah, their influence is expanding rapidly.
So what are they doing up there?
Okay, so they've got this thing called the Polar Silk Road, which is part of their bigger Belt and Road initiative.
Okay.
And through this, they've been investing heavily in the Russian Arctic. We're talking billions of dollars, 10 billion. And it's mostly going into energy projects like oil and gas and also infrastructure, building ports and roads and stuff.
So they're basically setting themselves up as a major player.
Oh, yeah, they're not messing around.
And that can't be all good news for India, right?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on, right? Because if one country has too much control over resources and infrastructure in such a strategically important area, it can create problems for everyone else.
Right. It's about balance.
Exactly, balance of power.
So how can India, counter that? They're talking about closer collaboration with Russia on the NSR.
Yeah, that's a key strategy. How would that work?
So India and Russia already have a strong partnership, right? And working together on the Northern Sea route could do a few things.
Okay.
First, it would, help balance out China's influence.
Okay.
It's like having another strong player on the field, right?
Right.
Second, it would give India more options for getting energy resources because Russia has a ton of oil and gas in the Arctic.
And maybe most importantly, it could help prevent Russia from becoming too dependent on China.
Ah, I see.
So it's delicate, it's about finding that balance, but it could be really important strategically.
Yeah, it's a high stakes game for sure.
Yeah, and the Arctic is this new stage for all this geopolitical competition.
In China, they're not even shy about it.
Yeah.
Right? They're calling themselves a near Arctic state.
Right, they're making their presence known.
So what should India do? We're not geographically right up there. How do we assert ourselves? How do we make our interests known?
Well, it means that India needs to really step up its game in terms of strategic autonomy,
Okay.
Not relying on any one country too much and having partnerships with lots of different countries.
So spreading the risk, so to speak.
Exactly, diversifying.
Okay.
And also being more proactive in the Arctic, not just focusing on science and sustainability, but also engaging in all the political and security discussions.
So having a seat at the table.
Exactly, you got to be in the room where it happens.
And it seems like our relationship with Russia, that's really crucial to all of this, especially when we talk about the resources, right?
Oh, absolutely. India wants to access those Arctic resources, the oil, the gas, the minerals, and Russia's the key to that.
Okay.
They control more than half of the Arctic coastline.
Wow.
And they've got massive deposits of all that stuff.
And India's already putting its money where its mouth is, right?
Yeah, India's invested $15 billion in Russian oil and gas projects already, so that shows you how serious they are about this partnership.
Yeah, that's a big commitment.
It is, and it's only going to get bigger.
So beyond the resources, there's also this push to boost trade between India and Russia.
Yeah, big time.
How does the Arctic fit into that?
So at the last big summit between India and Russia, they both said they want to increase trade and investment, especially in the Russian Far East and the Arctic.
Okay.
And they've even created a special group to work on the Northern Sea route, to figure out how to make it work for both countries.
So this is actually happening. It's not just talk.
Oh, yeah, they're putting things in motion.
And they've set a pretty ambitious goal, right? Like $100 billion in bilateral trade.
By 2030, that's the target.
Wow.
So yeah, they're really serious about this.
So it's clear that India's not just, up there looking at the pre-glaciers and doing science experiments.
No, it's definitely not.
It's about geopolitics. It's about energy security. It's about, India's position in the world as things shift towards Asia.
Right, and all of that is tied to the Arctic and specifically to the partnership with Russia.
Yeah, and Russia's sitting on like 80% of the Arctic's oil and gas. That's a huge amount of power.
Yeah, it's a major resource, and India needs reliable energy sources to keep growing.
So we've talked about India's perspective, but what does Russia think about all this?
Right, well, the Russian ambassador to India, Denis Alepov, he had some interesting things to say.
Oh, okay.
He basically said that Russia sees India's role in the Arctic as a good thing. He called it constructive and a stabilizing force.
Interesting. So they're not threatened by India's presence.
No, not at all. They actually seem to welcome it.
Okay.
And he even contrasted India's approach with what he called the militarization and unilateral policies of some NATO countries.
Ah, so there's a little bit of, geopolitical maneuvering going on here.
Oh, definitely some subtext there.
So Russia's basically saying, hey, we like having India up here. It's good for everyone.
Yeah, they're happy to partner with India on science, the environment, and even business.
And speaking of science, India and Russia are already doing some joint research projects in the Arctic, right?
Yeah, they're collaborating on a bunch of things. Climate change, obviously, atmospheric science, geosciences, glaciology, all that good stuff.
So like the really core scientific disciplines that help us understand what's going on up there.
Exactly. And Indian scientists are even studying how the Arctic affects the monsoons in South Asia.
Oh, wow. So there's a direct connection to India's weather.
Yeah, it's all connected.
And who are the main players in this scientific collaboration?
So on the Russian side, you've got the Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute. And for India, it's the National Center for Polar and Oceanic Research.
Okay.
And they've got this agreement, a memorandum on Arctic research that they signed in 2024, which basically sets the stage for even more collaboration in the future.
So it's a pretty solid foundation for scientific partnership.
Yeah, definitely.
But beyond the science, there's also the potential for, actual business ventures, right?
Yeah.
Joint ventures to explore and extract resources.
Oh, yeah, that's the big prize, right?
What's the latest on that?
So both countries are actively looking into this. How can they work together to get access to the oil, the gas, the minerals?
Right.
And this could be huge for India's energy security, having a stake in those resources.
And of course, we can't forget about the Northern Sea Route.
Right. That keeps coming up.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a key part of the whole India-Russia maritime cooperation, using the Arctic as a shortcut for trade.
And are they making any progress on that?
Oh, yeah. They've got this joint working group, and they met back in October to talk about all the practical stuff, how to move cargo, how to train Indian sailors to navigate in the Arctic, even how to build ships together.
So they're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, they're not just talking, they're making plans.
Yeah, they're working on an actual agreement, right?
Yeah, a memorandum of understanding specifically on NSR cooperation.
Wow.
So that'll formalize everything and really boost the partnership.
So Russia's not just talking the talk, they're actually, walking the walk. They're offering some pretty concrete support.
Yeah, for example, they've offered to let India use some of their research stations in the Arctic.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal.
Yeah, these are stations that Russia's not using right now, so India could go in and really expand its research capabilities.
So they're giving us the keys, so to speak.
Pretty much, they're saying, come on in, let's work together.
So last but not least, let's talk about the bigger picture, right? India's making all these investments in Russia's Far East, and then there's the NSR.
Right.
And this was a big topic when Modi visited Moscow in 2023.
Yeah, it was a key point of discussion.
Why is that connection so important?
It's about creating this stable and efficient transport corridor across Eurasia,
Well,
India investing in the Far East helps develop that region, and then the NSR provides a shorter route to get goods to market.
so it's a win-win.
Yeah, it strengthens economic ties and also geopolitical ties. It
Yeah.
brings India and Russia closer together.
So To sum it all up for our listeners,
Yeah.
especially those of you who are prepping for the UPSC exams,
Right. Pay attention.
India's Arctic policy, it's changing, it's evolving.
Yeah, it's dynamic.
It started out focused on the environment and science, but now it's got to deal with all this geopolitical stuff, the power struggles, the competition.
And the security implications, can't forget about that.
Right, and the partnership with Russia, that's crucial.
It's at the heart of it all.
But it's not simple, right? There are opportunities, but there are also challenges, especially with China becoming more and more influential.
It's a multipolar world now. You got to play the game carefully.
So if you want to understand India's foreign policy, its economic strategy, its place in the world, you got to understand the Arctic.
Yeah, it's a key piece of the puzzle.
All right, so here's a final thought for you to chew on. How can India balance its goals in the Arctic, the science, the development, with all the strategic and security stuff?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
That balancing act.
And the answer will shape how India engages with the world for years to come.
So we hope this deep dive was helpful, especially if you're getting ready for those UPSC exams.
We tried to make it clear and concise, the key takeaways.
If you found it useful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this.
And let us know what you think in the comments. What are your thoughts on India's Arctic policy?
And don't forget, we got all this info from the Hindu and ORF, so if you want to dig deeper, those are great places to start.
Yeah, check them out.
So, until next time, keep learning, keep exploring,
Stay curious.
and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
See ya!